Once upon a time, in a quaint little town nestled between rolling hills and blooming fields, there was a school that had earned a reputation for academic excellence. At the heart of this school was a teacher named Mr. James. He was well respected and had dedicated many years to teaching mathematics, a subject he loved with deep enthusiasm. However, it was known among the students that Mr. James could be quite stern. His serious demeanor and high expectations made many students feel anxious and often terrified of making mistakes. Among those students was a bright young boy named Kofi. Kofi came from a humble background and had emigrated to America from a small village in Africa with his family. The adjustment to a new culture was daunting, and every day posed new challenges for him. His family lived in a cramped apartment, where his parents worked long hours at jobs that paid very little. Despite these hardships, Kofi had an unquenchable thirst for knowledge and harbored big dreams for the future. Kofi excelled in math. It was his favorite subject, a refuge from his daily struggles. He found comfort in numbers, which were logical and predictable when the world around him sometimes felt chaotic. He yearned to prove himself, to show everyone that he could succeed despite the odds stacked against him. However, he knew that Mr. James had a reputation for his strictness, and the thought of answering questions in class made him anxious. One seemingly ordinary Tuesday, something momentous happened in Mr. James's class. He was working on a complex equation on the blackboard, explaining to the students how to solve quadratic functions. His explanations were detailed and thorough, and the students listened intently, trying to absorb every word. Suddenly, on the blackboard, he made a small but significant mistake, a miscalculation in a step of the equation. Kofi, who had been paying particularly close attention, raised his hand hesitantly. Mr. James, he said, his voice barely rising above a whisper. I think that should be a minus sign, not a plus sign. To Kofi's utter surprise, Mr. James turned to him, his expression one of irritation. Kofi, he retorted, if you think you know better than me, perhaps you should lead the class yourself. The room fell silent, and the other students shifted awkwardly in their seats. Kofi's face burned red with embarrassment. He had only tried to help, but instead, he felt humiliated. After class, he left the room quickly, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. As Kofi walked home that day, he couldn't shake the feeling of shame that clung to him like a dark cloud. Why had he even opened his mouth? Perhaps he really was not as good at math as he thought. Maybe he should just keep quiet from now on. He doubted whether he should participate in class again. The thought of facing Mr. James again made him feel queasy. In the days that followed, Kofi found it increasingly hard to engage in class. He sat quietly at the back, avoiding eye contact, hoping no one would call on him. Math, which had once been a joy, now felt like a burden. He missed the days when he would excitedly participate, but now he felt like he was disappearing. Meanwhile, Mr. James sat at his desk each day, reviewing his lesson plans and grading papers. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. His thoughts drifted back to the incident with Kofi. He had been too harsh, too quick to dismiss the boy's tentative attempt to contribute. Had he truly meant to undermine Kofi's confidence? He couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt, particularly as he noticed how Kofi had grown quieter and more withdrawn in class. One afternoon, Mr. James made a conscious decision to change his approach. He wanted to create a classroom environment where students felt safe to share their ideas and make mistakes. A place built on encouragement and positivity, rather than fear and intimidation. Thus, he planned a lesson centered on collaboration, creativity, and understanding that mistakes were a part of the learning process. The next day, Mr. James introduced a new teaching method. Today, he announced, we're going to work in groups. I want each of you to solve a series of math problems together. And remember, it's perfectly all right if you make a mistake. That's how we learn. The surprise in the room was palpable. Kofi, sitting at the back, felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Perhaps he could participate after all. What if he could voice his thoughts without feeling judged? As the students formed small groups around the classroom, Kofi joined a group of classmates. They began to tackle the problems, sharing their approaches and learning from one another. Kofi, feeling a bit bolder, offered a suggestion on how to approach one of the problems. To his surprise, His classmates listened attentively and nodded in agreement. They worked through the problem together, and when they solved it, Kofi felt a surge of pride wash over him. He was still hesitant, but this time, things felt different. As the weeks rolled on, Mr. James continued to implement collaborative lessons, creating a space where students could share and learn together. Kofi gradually found his voice again. With Mr. James's encouragement, he began to contribute to class discussions. He still had moments of doubt, but he kept pushing himself, fueled by the supportive atmosphere that was forming. During one lesson, Mr. James introduced a math competition. He divided the class into teams and set them up with a series of challenging problems to solve against the clock. Kofi was paired with a few classmates he had previously felt too shy to talk to. At first, he was nervous, but as they worked together, he recognized how his contributions were valued. "This is a great idea, Kofi," one classmate exclaimed as Kofi suggested a new strategy to tackle the next problem. Kofi felt encouraged. They made it a point to build each other up, celebrating every small victory. They won the competition, and as their classmates cheered, Kofi realized that he was no longer invisible. He was part of something bigger, belonging to a community. Kofi's growth did not go unnoticed by Mr. James. He took the time to pull him aside after class one day, offering genuine praise. "Kofi," he said, sincerity written all over his face, "I've seen how much you've improved over the last few weeks. You really shone during the competition today. I'm proud of you." Kofi's heart swelled at the words. For the first time since arriving at the school, he felt a true sense of recognition and acceptance. As the school year continued, Kofi and Mr. James developed a unique bond. Kofi felt comfortable approaching Mr. James for extra help or clarification on challenging concepts. Mr. James, for his part, made sure to check in with Kofi regularly, always encouraging him and helping him see the value of his ideas. Kofi began sharing more about himself in class, too. He spoke about his background, the challenges his family faced, and the dreams he held in his heart. He dreamed of going to college one day to study engineering, hoping to find ways to improve infrastructure in his community back in Africa. His classmates were captivated by his story and inspired by his determination. They formed a tight-knit group, fostering an environment where everyone could share their own dreams and ambitions. As the spring semester approached, Kofi's confidence grew even more. He started a small after-school math club where students could gather to solve problems, share ideas, and support each other in their learning. Mr. James helped him outline a plan, giving Kofi the reins to lead the initiative. The club quickly gained popularity, pulling in classmates from various grades, and Kofi developed his leadership skills while nurturing an environment of encouragement and camaraderie. In the meantime, Kofi had made significant progress in his schoolwork. He began earning top marks in his exams and was recognized as one of the best math students in the class. Mr. James was overjoyed. He saw Kofi thriving and realized that the boy had not only grown academically but also socially. Kofi was no longer the shy, quiet boy who had walked into his class months ago. He was now a leader among his peers. As the end of the school year approached, Mr. James decided to organize a special project that would allow the students to showcase their growth over the past months. He wanted to create a student celebration day, where students would present their favorite projects, artworks, and accomplishments to their peers, teachers, and families. The idea was to create a sense of achievement, as well as an opportunity for them to express who they had become over the year. Kofi's excitement was palpable. He decided that he wanted his presentation to revolve around the importance of believing in oneself and overcoming challenges. He encouraged his classmates to share their own stories of triumph. In the weeks leading up to the event, the students collaborated, creating posters and presentations that highlighted their experiences and dreams. On the day of the celebration, the school was buzzing with energy. The gymnasium was decorated, and parents and faculty mingled, eager to hear the students speak. One by one, Kofi's classmates took to the stage, bravely sharing their struggles and achievements. Each story met with cheers and applause. When it was Kofi's turn, he walked up to the microphone, his heart racing. He looked out at the audience, his friends, his teachers, and his family all there to support him. As he spoke, he began to recall his journey, from the shy boy who feared the classroom to the confident student standing before them. I want to tell everyone here today that it's okay to struggle and make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them and help one another, he said, his voice steady. I've learned this from Mr. James and from all of you. He shared his dreams of going to college and returning to his home country to help build better roads and schools. The crowd was entranced, listening intently as Kofi articulated hopes not just for himself, but for others around him. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Tears of joy welled in Mr. James's eyes as he clapped proudly for Kofi, who had come so far. Kofi beamed with pride. He had found his voice and proved that his story mattered. That evening, as the celebration continued, Mr. James approached Kofi, wrapping an arm around his shoulder. You know, Kofi, I've learned so much from you this year. Your strength and perseverance have inspired not just your classmates, but me as well, he said, sincerity etched in his features. Thank you for being brave and for showing all of us what true courage looks like. Kofi smiled, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. Thank you for believing in me, Mr. James. I couldn't have done any of this without your support, he replied. In that moment, both teacher and student recognized that they had changed each other for the better. As summer approached, Kofi realized that this chapter of his life was only the beginning. He had plans for the future, aspirations that burned brightly in his heart. With each day, he continued to build on the progress he had made, confident that he could achieve his dreams. For Mr. James, the school year had been transformative. He had learned the importance of kindness, the power of encouragement, and the impact a single moment can have on a child's life. He resolved to carry these lessons into future classrooms, creating spaces where students could not only learn but grow, becoming the best versions of themselves. And so, in that little town, a friendship blossomed between Kofi and Mr. James, one rooted in respect, understanding, and the promise of a bright future. Together, they learned that by believing in one another, they could create a ripple effect of positive change that would resonate throughout their community and beyond. As they bid farewell to the school year, both were filled with hope. The world lay ahead of them filled with opportunities, and they were ready, both Kofi and Mr. James, ready for the next adventure in their journeys ahead.